There is a very quiet fear that many sons and daughters have never said out loud. We are still by our parents' side, still calling, still paying for medicine, still checking in with a few questions every day. And yet we may not realize in time that they could be slowly letting go of life itself. It does not happen through one major event. There is no warning sound, no dramatic moment. It is just that one day you suddenly notice your loved ones smiling less, talking less, and their eyes no longer staying in family conversations for very long. The saddest part is that this kind of change usually comes very slowly, so slowly that everyone assumes it is normal. And because it feels so normal, it slips past the hearts of the people who love them like a faint breeze. A lot of families comfort themselves by saying, well, they are old now. Of course they get tired. Of course they get bored. Of course they like being alone more than before. That sounds reasonable because age really does slow people down. It makes them weaker. It drains their energy. But some silences are not the silence of old age. They are the silence of someone who has been tired for too long and does not know who to tell. Sometimes a simple sentence like, "No, Mom is not going anywhere," sounds like an ordinary refusal, but behind it there may be a feeling that she no longer belongs in any joy at all. What older people fear most is not always illness. Sometimes it is the feeling that they are slowly becoming unnecessary in their own home. Just thinking about that is enough to make your chest tighten. I once heard a very ordinary story like this. There was a mother who sat every day in her usual chair out on the porch, watching her children and grandchildren come and go, listening to dishes clatter in the kitchen, listening to neighbours calling to one another outside. Then for a while she still sat there, but she stopped starting conversations. The family thought maybe she was just tired. After some more time, she stopped coming out to the porch altogether. The door stayed open, but she stayed in her room, leaving the television on, just so there would be some human sound in the house. No one thought it was anything serious until the quiet stretches in the home started feeling longer than before. Some changes do not shock you right away, but they haunt you for a very long time once you finally understand what they meant. That is why in this video I want to walk with you through 7 very ordinary signs that may show an older person is slowly losing the will to live. Not so we panic, not so we blame ourselves for being careless, but so that if your father, your mother, or someone you love at home is quietly growing weaker in spirit, you might notice a little sooner, understand them a little better, and hold on to them through small but sincere things. Sometimes one gentle question asked at the right moment is worth far more than 1,000 big pieces of advice. And sometimes what keeps a person here begins with one simple feeling, that they are still being seen. But please stay with me until the end of this video, because the last sign is the one many families get wrong the most. It looks like ordinary preparation for old age. It looks like being practical, like trying to think ahead, like leaving a few instructions so the children will feel at peace. But in many cases, it is actually the saddest sign of all, and the most urgent one, that inside them a quiet goodbye is already taking place. This video is not here to judge anyone, because no son or daughter, no grandchild, ever wants to realize too late. We do not have to be perfect to love our family. Realizing things before it is too late is already something precious. GK. So what are the first signs, the very small ones, that family members should really pay attention to? The saddest thing is that they usually do not show up through tears or a clear cry for help. They show up through silence in the most familiar parts of daily life. Someone who used to sit in the living room listening to the children and grandchildren talk slowly starts retreating into their room. Someone who used to enjoy stepping outside for fresh air and chatting with the neighbors now only wants to close the door, lie still, and say they are tired. Many families see that and think, Well, they are old now, so of course they like peace and quiet. But sometimes it is not that they enjoy peace and quiet. Sometimes they are slowly disconnecting from life around them. And when a person stays withdrawn for too long, what they are missing is not just human voices. It is the feeling that they still belong somewhere. Some forms of withdrawal sound so soft, so harmless, that it is hard to blame anyone for missing them. Mom no longer wants to go to family memorial gatherings. Dad no longer sits out on the porch every afternoon. Grandma and Grandpa stop calling the children and grandchildren on their own, and they no longer seem eager to ask about what is happening in the family. They are still there. They still eat meals with everyone else, but their mind seems to have stepped back from it all. On the outside, everything may look normal, but inside them there may already be a huge empty space that no one has touched. The older a person gets, the less likely they are to speak their sadness out loud, so very often silence becomes the way they endure it. If you look closely enough, you will see that it is not that they dislike their family. It is that they are slowly losing the strength to step back into the joys that used to belong to them. And the most painful loneliness is always the one that happens in the middle of a crowded home. Then there is often another change, even more quiet than the first. They stop caring about the things that once made them happy. The person who used to lovingly tend the plants in the yard now lets the leaves dry out without watering them. The person who used to enjoy cooking something special for the children and grandchildren now says any food is fine, anything is fine. Some people still smile when they hear something funny, but the smile disappears so quickly that it feels more like a reflex than real joy. Families often think that is just part of getting older, that of course older people lose interest in things. But that is not always true. Sometimes what disappears is not just a hobby. It is the feeling that there is still something in life worth looking forward to. When a person no longer feels joy in the things that once made them come alive, then there may be a small flame inside them growing weaker. And the frightening part is not when they say they are tired of life. It is when they no longer even have the strength to say it. Then there is another sign that makes loved ones feel both tenderness and confusion. They start letting go of basic care for themselves. Their clothes are no longer as neat as before. They stop bothering to comb their hair. Meals become careless, and sometimes they skip one altogether without feeling that it matters. Their familiar room suddenly becomes messier, as if the person inside no longer cares enough to straighten it up. People on the outside may think old age has made them slower, lazier, or more difficult. But many times it is a sign of emotional exhaustion so deep that they no longer feel they are worth taking care of. When a person starts neglecting themselves, what they need is not criticism. What they need is a kind of gentleness warm enough to remind them they are still worthy of love. There are elderly hands that do not need us to do everything for them. They just need to know that someone still wants to sit beside them and say, "Let me help a little." And maybe this is the part that makes many people stop in their tracks. These changes rarely come alone. They often arrive together, quietly and steadily, the way a leaf starts drying from the edges before the damage spreads inward. A little withdrawal, a little loss of joy, a little giving up on themselves. Together they form a warning sign that families can easily miss if they are not paying close attention. We do not need to panic over every change in an older person, but we absolutely should not dismiss signs that continue for a long time. Because sometimes what they are losing is not just health, it is their reason to keep caring about tomorrow. And in the next part, there are signs that are even harder to notice, because they are often disguised as aches and pains, sleepless nights, and words that sound like nothing more than casual complaining. But if you only look at withdrawal or loss of interest, many families can still reassure themselves that things will pass. What makes it even easier to overlook is when that exhaustion begins moving through the body, taking on the shape of what looks like ordinary illness in old age. Suddenly, Dad cannot sleep as well. He lies awake until almost dawn, then sits quietly in the morning like someone who has just come back from a very long journey. Mom eats less and less. Meals no longer feel like something to look forward to. Sometimes she picks up a few bites and then puts her chopsticks down, saying she is not hungry. Some people go the opposite way. They sleep more than before, lie down all day, day after day, and still say they are exhausted. The whole family often assumes it is because of age, the weather, or body aches, but many times the body is speaking the sadness they cannot put into words. There is a very real truth here. Older people do not always say, "I am sad," or "I am feeling hopeless." They usually say it in a way that sounds more ordinary, more woven into daily life. Today I feel so tired. I feel restless inside. This hurts, that hurts. I cannot eat, I cannot sleep. Those complaints sound so familiar that families easily brush them off as normal health concerns. But when those pains drag on, when they have seen many doctors and the results still do not fully explain the heaviness inside them, then maybe it is not only the body that is tired. Some kinds of hopelessness in old age do not show up through tears. They show up in a bent posture, a cold, untouched meal, a house light still on deep into the night while no one knows what is weighing on their heart. Picture a very familiar scene. The whole family has already gone to sleep, but a small kitchen light is still on. An elderly father sits alone at the old table. He is not reading the paper, he is not looking at his phone, he is not doing anything at all. He is just sitting there, as if he does not know whether to go back to bed or keep staying awake with himself. The next morning he says he could not sleep because his back hurt. That may be true, but it may not be the whole truth. The back pain may be real, the tiredness in his joints may be real, but there may also be another kind of heaviness that no scan can see and no test can properly name. It is the burden of prolonged emptiness, the kind of exhaustion that comes from the mind when a person no longer knows what tomorrow is supposed to hold for them. Little by little, those changes in eating, sleeping, and energy begin to weigh down their whole being. The person who used to be neat and punctual now gets day and night mixed up. The person who once treasured family meals now sits at the table only to please the children and grandchildren. The person who used to make an effort to walk around now wants to sit down after just a few steps because they feel drained all over. The heartbreaking part is that they often do not understand what is happening to them either. They feel weaker, more bothersome, more dependent, and that can easily grow into the belief that they are a burden. Once a person is hurting in the body and exhausted in the spirit, it becomes much easier for them to withdraw even deeper, like a door that has already been closed and becomes harder and harder to reopen. And if the family only looks for medicine to treat the pain, without seeing the loneliness behind it, the distance between them will keep growing. That is why when you notice an older person suddenly changing their eating or sleeping routine, feeling tired for a long time, or complaining of pain with no clear reason, what they need is not just a prescription or a sentence like, "try your best." Very often what they need is someone who will truly sit down with them and slowly ask whether something has felt heavy in their heart lately, whether something is making them not want to eat, not want to sleep, not want to keep stepping through this life anymore. Some pain starts in the body, but some pain uses the body as a way to finally be heard. And in the next part, we come to a sign that can trouble families even more, because it shows up in everyday words. It sounds casual, almost random, but it can actually be the saddest cry for help from someone who is slowly losing the will to keep going. There is a kind of heartbreak in older people that is very hard to recognize. It is when the sadness no longer shows itself through appearance or sleep, but starts coming out through words. To most people, it sounds like ordinary complaining that comes with old age. A half-joking sentence at dinner. A very soft sigh while watching the children and grandchildren rush around. A quiet remark at sunset, thin as the wind, but the kind that leaves an ache in your chest long after you hear it. Because those words sound so ordinary, so much like everyday weariness, many families let them pass. But sometimes, when a person no longer has the strength to cry or explain what they are enduring, they reveal it only through a few very short sentences. And those short sentences can be the most frightening signs of all. You may have heard words like this before. I have lived long enough. I am only making life harder for you children. It would be easier if I went to sleep and never woke up. When I am gone someday, I will not be a bother to anyone anymore. Many loved ones react right away by brushing it off, saying, "Do not say such things, do not think that way. Old people say things like that all the time." That reaction is deeply human, because no one wants to believe that the person they love is truly feeling hopeless. But the problem is that those words are not always just casual complaints. Sometimes they are a way of testing whether anyone can hear the pain inside them. Sometimes they are speaking in circles because they are afraid that saying it directly will scare their children and grandchildren, or because they are afraid of becoming a burden in someone else's eyes. The most painful truth is that many older people do not actually want to leave life. They just want to escape the feeling that they no longer matter in anyone else's life. Imagine a familiar dinner table. A grandchild is happily chattering about school. The grown children are talking about work, money, medicine, everyday concerns. An elderly mother sits there, still putting food into everyone's bowl out of a habit she has carried for decades. Then right in the middle of all the laughter and talking, she quietly says, "When I am gone someday, life will probably be easier for you all." That sentence may disappear beneath the sound of dishes and conversation. No one catches it. No one turns back to ask more. But sometimes that one sentence is a cry for help hidden inside resignation. The more an older person loves their family, the more likely they are to swallow their sadness and push it deeper down. And by the time they manage to say something like that out loud, their heart has often been exhausted for a very long time. Then there is another sign that can leave families with even more regret, because on the surface it looks like thoughtfulness, planning ahead, even the wisdom of old age. It is when they suddenly start giving more instructions than usual, or begin giving away precious belongings, things they have kept for a lifetime and never let anyone touch before. An old ring, a notebook, a tea set, a watch they have worn for decades, or just a few words that when you listen carefully sound more like a quiet farewell. Families are often moved by this and think their parents are simply preparing wisely for the future, trying to make things easier for the children later on. That may be true, but in some cases, behind all that organizing is the feeling that they are slowly closing out their part of life, like someone gently placing one memory after another on the table before walking out of the room. Some goodbyes come without tears, without warning, with only silence. A father suddenly starts calling each of his children, even though he was never much of a caller before. A mother begins bringing up old memories more often, and carefully repeating small instructions, as if she is afraid there may not be another chance to say them. A grandfather hands his old watch to his son and smiles, saying, Keep this as something to remember me by. Moments like these can look perfectly normal, even deeply warm. But if they come together with withdrawal, loss of interest, prolonged exhaustion, disrupted eating and sleeping, and those defeated remarks from earlier, then the family should never take them lightly, because older people may not know how to say, "Please help me," in the most direct way. Sometimes the only way they can do it is by saying goodbye a little at a time, hoping someone will be sensitive enough to understand that behind that calm face is despair that has been sitting there for a very long time. If you have listened this far and suddenly recognize someone you love in some of these signs, please do not rush to blame yourself. Love does not always come with immediate understanding. Some kinds of pain can only be helped after they are finally called by the right name. And in the next part, the most important question is no longer how to recognize the signs, but where to begin so that someone who is emotionally worn down can feel that they still have reasons to stay with this family and with this life. Recognizing the signs is already hard. What troubles many people even more is what to do after they have recognized them. Because when faced with a parent's sadness, children often fall into two familiar extremes. Either they panic, say too much, give too much advice, and hope their loved one will suddenly feel better, or they stay quiet and tell themselves everything will probably be fine in a few days. But older people who are emotionally exhausted usually do not need big words. They need something much smaller and much harder to give. They need the feeling that someone is truly willing to sit down without rushing, without judging, and with enough patience to stay beside them through the long silence. Sometimes what keeps a person here is not a perfect solution. It is simply the moment they realize that someone is finally willing to listen to their pain. So if you notice these signs in someone you love, the first thing not to do is dismiss them with sentences like, "You are overthinking," "Old people are all like that," or "You need to be stronger." Those words are not cruel. They are just so familiar that they make the hurting person feel even less able to open up. Try something gentler instead. Instead of asking, "What do you even have to be sad about?" ask, "Has your heart been feeling heavy lately?" Instead of rushing to tell them to go out and get their mind off things, sit down beside them, pour them a glass of water and say, "If you want to talk, I am here to listen." Older people often do not need a perfect conversation right away. They just need to know that if they do open their mouth, they will not be seen as weak, troublesome, or a burden to their children and grandchildren. Some doors stay closed for a very long time, and they do not open through logic. They open through sincere presence. Then start with very small things. Do not try to pull them out of the darkness in a single day. Spend a little longer at one meal together. Invite them to sit out on the porch for a while one afternoon. Water a plant together. Ask whether Mom still likes an old dish she used to love. Bring up an old story so Dad has a chance to talk about the years when he once lived so fully. These things sound small, but to someone who is slowly losing the will to live, they can be the very first thread tying them back to the feeling that they still matter in this home, that they still exist in someone else's joy. Older people do not always need to be rescued by something grand. Many times they just need to be invited back into the warm routines they once belonged to. And from those small moments, a person can begin to see that tomorrow may not be completely empty after all. But there are times when love alone is not enough. If your loved one often talks about death, calls themselves a burden, gives away treasured belongings, says unusual goodbyes, stops eating or sleeping for a long time, or truly seems to be giving up, then the family should not simply suffer in silence or wait for things to pass on their own. At that point, reaching out to a professional is not overreacting. It is a responsible form of love. Many older people feel embarrassed about seeing a therapist or mental health professional because they are afraid people will think something is wrong with them. But the truth is simple. If you have heart pain, you see a heart doctor. If the pain is in the spirit, you also need the right kind of help. What matters is that the family leads them there gently, without making them feel like a burden. It can be as simple as saying, "I can see that you have been so tired lately. Let us go talk to someone who might help your heart feel a little lighter." Sometimes a gentle invitation like that can save an entire stretch of life that is slowly slipping into despair. And please remember this, because it matters so much. We are not doctors, so we do not need to carry the pressure of understanding every sign in our loved ones right away. But we can be the first people to notice that inside all that silence there is pain. We can be the ones who do not laugh it off when they say things that sound like giving up. We can be the ones who do not let a cry of pain disappear in the middle of a family meal. There are times when saving a person does not begin with saying something big or perfect. It begins with being willing to stop sooner, look more closely, and hold their hand before they drift one step farther away. And once we understand that, perhaps the most important thing left is not fear. It is learning how to love one another while there is still time. After all these signs and all these ways to begin bringing a loved one closer to life again, there is one thing many families forget. Older people do not only need care, they also need to feel that they still have value. That is a very quiet need, but it reaches all the way down to the root of the will to live. Because when a person starts feeling like they are only someone who receives help, only someone who causes inconvenience, only a name that comes up in sentences like, "Do not forget to buy medicine for Dad," or "Do not forget to take Mom to her appointment," then deep inside it becomes very easy for them to feel that they are now living off other people. And when that feeling stays too long, it does not just make a person sad, it slowly takes away their reason to keep moving through each day. Many families love their parents so much that they start doing nearly everything for them. They see Dad moving a little slowly, so they jump in and do it for him. They notice Mom forgetting things, so they stop letting her take part in anything at all. Every intention is good, every act of care is real. But sometimes that very thoughtfulness quietly pushes older people out of their role in the family. A person who was once the pillar of the house, who raised children and helped raise grandchildren, who made countless important decisions for the family, suddenly hears only, "Just sit there and rest." It sounds loving, but to someone whose heart is already fragile, it can feel like confirmation that they really are no longer useful. And for most people, especially near the end of a long life, aging is not as frightening as becoming unnecessary. That is why, along with checking on them and staying beside them, families also need to give older people back the feeling that they are still needed. Not through heavy tasks, but through things that are within their ability and full of respect. Ask Mom what she thinks the family should cook today, so everyone will enjoy the meal more. Ask Dad to teach an old skill that everyone has always admired in him. Let Grandpa tell the children an old story. Let Grandma help pick out an outfit for the little one. Let them offer an opinion on a family decision, even if it is something small. Things that seem this simple can lift a person up more than you realize, because they remind them that they are not merely existing. They are still present in the lives of the people they love in a meaningful way. There was once a mother who for many months quietly ate very little, spoke very little, smiled very little, and kept saying that she was old now and no longer useful to her children and grandchildren. Her daughter did not try to force her to cheer up, and she did not speak in grand emotional lines. She simply began each morning by bringing out a basket of vegetables and asking her mother to help sort them, asking how to season the soup so it would taste like it used to years ago. Then in the evening she let the grandchild sit beside her and ask for old family stories. The change did not happen fast, but it was real. That mother started waking up a little earlier. She started caring a little more about meals. She started talking a little more. It was not because every pain disappeared overnight. It was because the feeling that she was still useful had returned. And sometimes that feeling alone is the quiet thread that pulls a person back toward life. So if you are worried that an older loved one is slowly losing the will to live, do not only ask whether they are tired or where they hurt. Ask yourself one more thing. Lately, do they still feel needed? Because very often what makes a person want to stay is not only receiving enough care, it is seeing that their presence still means something to someone. A meal where they are still invited to help. A story that someone still wants to hear. A piece of advice that someone still values. A look in someone's eyes that tells them this home feels fuller because they are in it. And maybe that is the gentlest way to keep a person here in this life, not by letting them live as a burden people pity, but as a loved one who still has a place in the family's heart. By now you may have realized something very important. Older people rarely say directly that they are slowly losing the will to live. They do not always cry. They do not always complain. They do not always have the words to name their pain. Many times, everything shows up only in very small, ordinary ways. Someone suddenly withdraws from the conversations they used to join. They no longer want to go outside. They no longer care about the things that once made them happy. They begin neglecting their meals, their sleep, and even their own appearance. Sometimes it is lingering physical pain that no one can clearly explain. Sometimes it is a sentence that sounds casual, saying they are a burden or that they have lived long enough. And perhaps most heartbreaking of all, sometimes it is that strange calmness when they start giving instructions, giving away treasured belongings, and arranging everything as though they are quietly closing a chapter of their life. If you look at each sign by itself, it is easy to think it is all just old age. But when many of these signs appear together, continue for a long time, and keep repeating, then what the family needs to do is not reassure themselves and move on. They need to stop and look more closely. Because the scariest thing is not one more wrinkle on your parent's face. It is the possibility that they are living among loved ones and still feel like they do not belong. Not every older person can say they are lonely. Not every older person has the courage to say they are simply too tired to keep going. So sometimes love does not begin with saying something beautiful. It begins with paying attention to the small changes you used to dismiss as normal. And just by noticing a little sooner, you may still be in time to hold on to someone who is quietly retreating into silence. But what I hope most after this video is not that you walk away feeling anxious, and certainly not guilty. The truth is that none of us were fully taught how to recognize emotional pain in our parents. Many children only understand later, after growing older themselves and stumbling through life a little more, that some sadness in old age is not about money or medicine. It is about the feeling of no longer being needed, of no longer being a source of joy in the home. So if today you suddenly saw your parents, your grandparents, or another loved one in some of these signs, please do not blame yourself for understanding too late. The most important thing is that from this moment on, you are looking at them with different eyes, slower eyes, deeper eyes, kinder eyes. You may not be able to change everything by tomorrow. You do not need to become a perfect person to save someone you love. Sometimes it is just one phone call that lasts a little longer than usual. One meal where you sit together a little longer. One sincere question instead of a polite, routine one. One moment of holding your parent's hand without rushing. One time sitting down to listen to an old story without interrupting. Sometimes a person stays in this life not because something dramatic happened, but because they suddenly realize they are still being waited for, remembered, loved, and needed in this home. Hope does not always arrive as a bright, shining light. Sometimes it comes as one small lamp that somebody cared enough to turn on. If this video touched something very real in your heart, save it so you can come back to it when you need to. And if you have siblings, relatives, or friends who are caring for aging parents, send this video to them too. Sometimes all it takes is one person paying attention at the right moment for an entire family to avoid a lifetime of regret later on. And if you would like, leave a message, a story, or simply one line saying that you are still here with your parents. Because sometimes one person's willingness to share can become support for many other people. And I truly hope that after all of this, we will not only learn how to care for older people so they are physically well looked after, but also how to protect the feeling in their hearts that this life still deeply needs them here.